There was a man named Karl Marx, and he was a profane man. And this man, when I say profane, I mean he despised religion. He despised the concept of God. Religion is the opiate of the people, he said. The first condition of the emancipation of the working class is the abolition of religion. In other words, the whole communist society must become a profane place without God. Now, we know that various communist leaders created a death toll. Pol Pot, as many as 2.2 million deaths attributed to the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia, 1975 to 1979. Lenin, 1.5 million deaths attributed to the Bolshevik regime in the Soviet Union, 1917 to 1924. Stalin, as many as 60 million deaths, 1924 to 1953. Mao Zedong, 70 million deaths, as many as 70 million, including in China, the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And then there was that reactionary, I'm talking about Adolf Hitler, who killed probably 17 million civilians and 6 million Jews. And for that reason, we see just how destructive a profane spirit can be. And when we talk about a profane person, we're talking about Esav or Esau. It says, lest there be any fornicator or profane person as Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his Bechorah, his birthright. And why does God say, Yaakov have I loved, and Esav or Esau have I hated? You have to keep in mind here, we're not talking about emotions. We're talking about hundreds of years after Jacob and his brother had died. The Israelites and the Edomites are bitter enemies, and the Edomites often aided Israel's enemies in attacks on Israel. Something we see going on again even today. And when people do this, they bring the curse on themselves. Just as Esav brought a curse on himself, or Esau. When you use the word profane, irreverent to any living sacred, anything sacred. A man is profane when he takes the name of the Lord in vain, of course, but we're talking about a profane, secular person, a godless person, a heathenish, godless person. this is why I gave Karl Marx as an example. And I tried to show just how destructive that profane spirit can be. And if you are a born again believer, there was a time, almost surely, when you were profane. And for one meal, he sold his Bechorah. It would have been the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. He would have, in a sense, when you talk about the kings of Israel, the kingdom would have devolved on him. The double portion, the right of leadership, etc. All these things are just an indication of what a believer has. And we must keep ourselves in the love of God. We must seek the Lord and turn away from all profane and evil things that are around us in this passing world. This is something that Marx, in his violent anger, in his diatribe type writings, where he demanded violent revolution if necessary, meaning murder, meaning death, to get his philosophy in place. When we think of the evil of this man and the great harm that has come to the world through this man, we can really come back to the Lord and to this chapter in Hebrews and think about it, because we're talking about one man for one meal in Hebrews chapter 12. One man for one meal. What did he do? He sold his Bechorah. And afterward, when he would have, or when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, for he found no place of teshuvah, though he sought it carefully with tears. So God has had mercy upon us. And now we need to work out our salvation with fear and trembling and turn away from all profane and evil things, some of which may be soul ties from our past before we were believers. Some may just be the trappings of the world around us. But most of the biblical narrative about Esav draw a great contrast between him and his brother Yaakov. One is a hunter and outdoorsman, favored by his father. One is not an outdoors type, favored by his mother. And even though he was a twin, he was considered the eldest son because he was born first. That means he would have inherited most of his father's property and the right to succeed him as family patriarch. But in a foolish, impulsive moment, he sold his Bechorah, his birthright. And what did he sell it for? In exchange for a single meal. Look at Bereshit 25, verses 29 to 34. And this meant that Yaakov would carry on the family name. And there would be a direct line of descent from Abraham to Yitzhak to Yaakov. And that the God of Israel would be known as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this loss of Esav's rights, I'm using the Hebrew pronunciation of his name, we say Esau. The loss of his rights as firstborn is further revealed in Bereshit 27, where Yaakov deceived his blind father by disguising himself as his twin in order to receive his father's blessing. And the one who had sold his birthright was so enraged that he determined to kill his twin once his father died. But Yaakov fled to his uncle Laban or Laban in Haran and remained there for 20 years. And upon his return to the promised land, we see his brother forgive him and set aside their old feuds. And years later, the twins together bury their father in the cave at Machpelah without any trace of their old hostilities. You see that in Genesis 35:29. But in many ways, we still have to see what God is holding up to us, because the scriptures are like a mirror. And unfortunately, many people look in the mirror and they walk away and they forget what they have seen. He sinned greatly by treating his birthright so casually and selling it so cheaply and impulsively. This is a high spiritual value we're talking about here. And if you are a believer, you go through the Brit Hadashah in the book of Ephesians, all these other places, you see what you have as a believer, what has been granted to you. Then you see what the rich young ruler impulsively discarded and walked away from. And of course, he felt sad, not knowing exactly what he had lost, but knowing that some spiritual transaction had just occurred where he made himself the loser. What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world but exchanges it for a single meal or some other thing that is casually and impulsively exchanged? The oldest son was responsible to serve a priest, the Cohen, to the rest of the family by encouraging worship of the one true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as it turned out. But Esau did not have the faith and the farsightedness to accept this privilege and responsibility. Thus, the right passed by default to his younger brother. Now, I'm holding in my hands here a very precious piece of technology. And I certainly wouldn't want to just toss it in the garbage. And I've seen many young people and even older people addicted to their phones, where their whole life is spent with this one little device controlling everything. And if you tried to take their phone away from them, they would be very much angry and resistant. But here we're talking about something more important than that. Your Bechorah as a believer, your birthright. And this is something that you must protect. When Yaakov, that cunning twin who took his brother by the heel, when he proposed to make some soup and use that as a selling point to get the birthright, the other twin should have argued and completely stopped him and said no. But how many backsliders don't do that? I'm talking about Rebbe, Melech, HaMoshiach, and your birthright. And the reason we have a nightly Zoom is simply to whom much is given, much is required. We dare not allow ourselves to become secular or profane or worldly. We dare not move in that direction because there's too much at stake in what we've been given. Isn't it a horrendous thing when a great and famous evangelist who's been given a tremendous ministry just sells it for a bowl of soup, of a temporary pleasure of some sort? And we know that it's because of this that worldly people scoff. And we know that we must fight the good fight, keep the faith, not sell it for a bowl of soup, and finish the race. And when we are bombarded with demonic temptations, when our thought life is clogged with Satan's fiery darts, we have to put on the whole armor of God. And that's what I'm going to do right now. The helmet of salvation, yes, Lord. The breastplate of righteousness, yes. The belt of truth. The sword of the Spirit. The shield of faith. The good news shoes. Praying in the Spirit in all kinds of prayers. And taking the whole armor of God and making our stand against the devil and saying, "The Lord rebuke you, Satan," and also, "Get behind me, Satan." And also, "Thank you for the birthright that I've been given, Lord. And may I always treasure it, guard it, keep it, and never casually or impulsively sell out, knowing the great thing that God has entrusted me with, and also the battle, the spiritual battle of walking in the Lord and keeping to the narrow road and the narrow gate and avoiding the highway, the Broadway that many are taking, even so-called ministers. Some ministers' errors are exposed immediately, but others, their secret sins come out later. We want to walk in the light as he is in the light, so we can have fellowship one with another. And the blood of the Korban Pesach lamb cleanses us from all ungodliness. And as long as we have people willing to pray every night, not just routine prayers memorized by rote that are just prayers given in a kind of rut fashion, but prayers in the scriptures, prayers from the heart, prayers that do spiritual battles, spiritual warfare, prayers that make the demons shudder and flee. As long as we have prayers like this and do not stop meeting together and have fiery biblical expository preaching, then the Lord, using the means of grace, will keep us and this ministry going until he comes. And that's what we want. So, Lord, I pray right now that someone listening tonight will realize that they have a birthright and that they cannot impulsively or casually sell it like Esau. That they cannot take the great thing that they have been given and set it aside to go after worldly things. Rebbe, Melech, HaMoshiach, hallelujah, and our birthright in him, we are holding up tonight, and we are coming against all the powers of hell that would attack that. And we give you all the praise, Lord, and all the glory. Hallelujah. And everyone said,